Hello class, this is Dr. Branch. We're going to talk about some key elements of practical personal finance. This lecture is a combination of some things you find in Chapter 4 of Common Sense Economics, but as you note as you've read the book, it doesn't have any Bible. So I'm bringing scripture into it, combining with some things from Dave Ramsey, a lot from Dave Ramsey, from Crown Financial Ministries, and from my own research. So financial insecurity is mainly the result of choices we make, not the incomes we earn. I think that's a key truth to keep in mind, that we are in places of financial insecurity, typically, not always, as the result of choices we make with how we spend our money and how we manage our money. And I would also add, for many of, I'm assuming most of you are going to be married, the greatest challenge in your first years of marriage and your first months of marriage will be learning how to manage money as a couple. So money has a lot to say about who we are and success in life. And if you don't have financial security, or if you're living in a state of financial insecurity, it also makes you more vulnerable to manipulation in ministry, because you start panicking, I'm not going to have enough money to take care of my family, and can tempt you to compromise. So part of success in ministry is learning how to manage money at a personal level. Dave Ramsey, this is one of my favorite quotes from him, is this: "You must gain control over your money, or the lack of it will forever control you." I hope you understand the profound simplicity and truth in that statement. You must gain control over your money, or the lack of it will forever control you. If you don't have any money, you're going to be forever controlled by that. And I want you to get in a place where you're free to do what the Lord wants you to do as you try to serve Him. So a few statistics on marriage and money in general. We are living in a crisis of debt. As of July of 2011, the data is a bit old, but the average credit card debt per household with credit card debt was almost $16,000. So that's a very specific statistic. Many people pay off their debt, but for families that do have credit card debt, it's almost $16,000. The average APR on a credit card offer is now 14.89%. And the typical credit card purchase usually is 112% higher than using cash. That means if you buy a set of speakers for $100 on a credit card, many people actually wind up paying $212 for the speakers. This is some data from the Federal Reserve. You've seen this sort of data before. If you only pay the minimum payment, how long it would take you to pay off a debt, and it's ridiculous. In our opinion, and by our, I mean my wife Lisa and I, separate checking accounts demonstrate a lack of unity or oneness in marriage. There may be some cases where it's the prudent thing for the wife to have a separate checking account because the husband is an alcoholic or he's a gambling addict, or the husband needs a separate checking account because the wife has a substance abuse problem. But our whole point is the fact that a couple needs a separate checking account in those situations is typically a lack of unity. Something's wrong. It is symbolic that there's at least a lack of trust. The most common mistake we observe with young couples is a his bills versus her bills mentality. When you get married, you don't have any more her bills and his bills. You only have our bills. They are all ours. So, living together before marriage often leads to this attitude, this his bills versus her bills attitude. One of the challenges of living together before marriage is you treat each other like boyfriend and girlfriend, and you pay the gas and I'll pay the electricity. That's not really the oneness in the covenant marriage Bible talks about. So you start out as roommates and not husband and wife, and it leads to a lot of problems. So foundational biblical principles. Number one, and this is the overarching principle. If we all got this, we would be so much further along. God owns everything. Haggai, the Lord says, "The silver is mine and the gold is mine, declares the Lord Almighty. All of it belongs to Him." Our clothing, our car, our house, our money, our income, it all belongs to God, and we are called to steward the money that God has given to us. The second principle follows closely on that. Once you understand that God owns everything, really leads to a sense of contentment that leads to peace. We've already talked about the danger of greed, but Solomon said in Ecclesiastes, "Whoever loves money never has money enough." Remember what Zig Ziglar said? How much money is enough? Just a little bit more. But the peace of contentment is this. Paul said, "We brought nothing into the world, we can take nothing out, but if we have food and clothing, we will be content with these." Of course, we're not talking about being content with living in a subhuman conditions, but we are talking about the basic necessities of life. We should have a sense of contentment. And with contentment, if you understand this peace that God desires that comes with contentment, helps us understand a disease, and it is a disease that finally has a name. It's stuffitis. It's the belief that more stuff will bring me peace. If I just get that car, it's going to make me happy. If I get the boat, it's going to make me happy. If I get that new wardrobe or a vacation or whatever the thing is, that thing is going to make me happy. Well, the challenge is it's like the carrot on the stick. You never quite get to it. And I have a silly reminder, and please forgive me in a very serious lecture in a college level class, but I hope this silly reminder will take you back to childhood. Perhaps many of you saw this video, but it was Madame Blueberry. I showed it to my children, and she would go to the stuff mart and buy all these things, and her house became so full of junk it fell down. That's stuffitis. Third thing is that money is morally neutral. We've already talked about that. It's also the word amoral. And so it can become an idol. As we said earlier, no one can serve two masters. The love of money is condemned in Scripture, but not money itself. In fact, you better have some money if you're going to get married. You got to pay for food and children when they come and health care and all those things. And don't miss this, that the biblical work ethic and the ethics of money are very closely related. Look at Proverbs 13:11. Dishonest money dwindles away, but he who gathers money little by little makes it grow. That's the biblical principle, not these huge scores, but working little by little, saving it. How about this? Idle hands make one poor, but diligent hands bring riches. If one is willing to work and apply oneself to work, it earns money in which you actually have something to manage. If you don't have a job, you don't earn any money, you don't have any money to manage besides what the government or other people give you in a handout. Here's what your textbook suggests from a secular perspective, and I think they're right. Find the occupational or business activity in which you have a comparative advantage. That means you're better at it than other people. And individuals will always be better off if they are really good at something that is highly valued by others. That's a very simple truth, but you need to find a skill that's highly valued by others and be good at that. Let me suggest to you, if you're really, really good at preaching, that's a highly valued skill. If you're really, really good at children's ministry, that's a highly valued skill. So think about it in those ways. But don't have a victim mentality that these things are just happening to me. Here's what your textbook says. Victims can feel they have certain rights that the world owes them, and they're disappointed or angry when the world doesn't deliver. That doesn't get you anywhere. So at some point, we all have to hang up the victim card and say we're not going to play that card. All of us have things that happen to us in life that are not fair or less than optimum. We all have to deal with them. So don't be a victim. Assume that we are responsible for our own actions and move forward. Principle 5 is give God his tithe. Now, I know a lot of people say that, well, tithing is an Old Testament principle. Well, I don't want to, I'm sure that no one's saying we should give less under grace than they gave under law. I think there's a basic principle there. The tithe seems to be a good principle to follow. In fact, Malachi chapter 3, God says, I'll pour open the storehouses and see if I won't bless you. If you're not tithing, I just challenge you to put God to the test and see if he's going to keep his word. Adrian Rogers once said, I'd rather live on 90% with God's blessing than 100% with God's curse. So give God his tithe. Just put him to the test. And closely related with that is save. Here's what Proverbs says. Go to the ant, you sluggard, good old word. Consider its ways, be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest. So you have to save money. In fact, Lisa and I have come to the conclusion that in many ways saving may be more important than tithing. And let me, bear with me for this. I believe you ought to tithe, but bear with me. If a couple doesn't have any money saved, they're always going to find an excuse not to tithe because they're spending all their money. So a best case scenario is this: 10% to God, 10% to savings, and then live on the rest. You've got to save money because stuff happens, stuff breaks. People with strong saving habits usually started savings when incomes were much lower. That means you say, well, I only make $20,000 a year. I don't have enough money to save. Wrong answer. There's no better time. Listen, if you only make $20,000 a year, you need to save more than anyone, because if an emergency comes, you're not going to have the $500 to buy tires for the car or whatever the case may be. So Principle 7 is the opportunity cost of money. We've talked about that a lot, but you have to keep in mind if you spend money on one item, you can't spend it on something else. If I spend $5 on lunch at Burger King, that means I don't have $5 to go buy a gallon of milk for my family. So we have to think about that. Don't be foolish with debt. Debt is a form of slavery. So your textbook is a little different than some of the Christian ministries. The textbook you've been using basically says don't be dumb with debt, and there's some debt that's good and some debt that's bad. Most Christian ministries want you to get out of debt and stay out of debt. You do need to remember, this is one of my favorite verses in the Bible, the rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is servant to the lender. So when you borrow money from someone, you are now their servant. And the Bible also strongly says co-signing for someone else is discouraged. Let me just tell you, as an Army chaplain, some of the most discouraging events happened when my soldiers were getting deployed. I had several soldiers whose parents were irresponsible with money, wanted to buy a new car, and wanted their soldier son or daughter to co-sign with them so they could buy a new car and using their deployment money as collateral. It's just hard. Don't co-sign with people. So don't finance anything that is longer than its useful life. That's what your textbook says. An example would be don't use debt to finance vacations no matter how badly you think you need it. So here's what your textbook says. Does it ever make sense for an individual or family to purchase a good on credit? The answer is yes, but only if the good is a long-lasting asset and if the borrowed funds are repaid before the asset is worn out. This is where borrowing money for cars can be a real problem because Dave Ramsey says save up your money and buy a car. That's definitely a best case option. But if you can't save enough money to get a really good car, sometimes you just keep driving beaters that just suck the money out of you. Constantly $1,000 here, $1,500 there repairing things. But if you buy a car that you're already upside down when you buy it, that you've paid more than it's worth, and then you financed it forever and it's wore out before it's paid off, that's really a bad way to go. The best option, if you're going to borrow money to buy a car, is buy a car that's 2 or 3 years old. Let somebody else take the beating on the depreciation. You're still going to get a lot of miles out of it, and you won't have to borrow as much money. Tuition is listen, should I borrow money? My advice to students, at least here at this school, is not to borrow money and not to take out student loans. The price of higher education has gone up exponentially. Would you look at this? Medical expenses have gone up 600% since the late 70s. College tuition has increased by almost 1,200%. It is ridiculous, 4 times faster than the Consumer Price Index. Look at this graph. This is absolutely discouraging. Here's what I want to tell you for the students taking this class and listening to this lecture. You're training for Christian ministry, and very few of you will ever make lots of money in Christian ministry. And if you have tons of debt, that tons of debt is going to suddenly eat into the salary, which is usually not that high when you're serving at a church anyway. You are far better off to pay for your education as you go without incurring any debt, even if it takes you longer and sometimes a lot longer. You're far better off to pay as you go than take out loans. My strongest advice is do anything you can not to take out student loans while in college. So here's, just to give you an idea, here's what one joke says. People are living longer than before. It's nature's way of helping you pay off your student loans. That is about true. You have to keep clear and precise financial records. You need to know the condition of your flocks at all times. I was a dean of students here, and I cannot tell you how many times students would get in trouble for not paying their rent. I'd call them to my office, and they acted surprised. They didn't know they hadn't paid their rent. And I told every one of them that I'd been married for years and decades at that time. There has never been a month in my life where I did not know whether or not I'd paid the rent or paid the mortgage. That's just ridiculous. Keep clear financial records. Don't be fooled by get-rich-quick schemes. The most common get-rich-quick scheme out there is state-sponsored lotteries. I have an entire lecture on that. If you play the lottery, you're throwing away your money, you're being a bad example for people you're trying to help. Don't do it. So stay away from investments with family members. If you want to ruin your family, it's just a bad idea. Stay away from investments which try to pressure you. If somebody's trying to press you into do something, just walk away. Don't do it. So here are the basics. Before you get married, most important question is this: has there been full disclosure? Have you told each other exactly how much debt you are bringing into the marriage? If you haven't, then you're headed for trouble. And the most basic question is where will we live? Crown Financial Ministries suggests that your housing be no more than 36% of your combined net income, but that may be too high if you're not making a lot of money. So if your combined net income is only $40,000, you may need to just find a way somewhere to live in an apartment for longer than you would prefer. You want to keep it below a certain percentage. This is what got so many people in our culture in trouble with the huge recession from 2008 on, because they're trying to pay for houses they couldn't afford. Dave Ramsey's basic steps, his baby steps, are awesome. It's a great plan to follow. The most important part of the step, again, goes back to Lisa and I. You got to save some money. If you don't have any money in the bank, every time an emergency comes along, you're going to keep going back and using debt, which is a bad idea. He recommends $1,000. Man, I say you're better off with $2,000 or $3,000. Especially when you're serving a church, you need to have some money in the bank, because sometimes employment at the church is not as secure as one might prefer. So when you're developing a budget, I cannot stress, a budget is just a way of naming every dollar. If you don't have a budget, I believe you're sinning. You've got to sit down and name every dollar that's coming into your household and identify where you expect it to go over the next month. And it lets you examine systematically how you are using your monthly disposable income. So I cannot stress enough, read Dave Ramsey's material on these 7 baby steps and his game plan. Lisa and I have used the envelope system for years. We put money in the envelope for restaurants and groceries, and we even have a blow money envelope. When the money is gone out of the cash is gone out of that envelope, that means we don't spend any more money. That keeps us in budget. It's hard and it's painful. It takes some work to get used to it, but it's a great. Stay away from gambling. Don't gamble. And if you cannot pay off the monthly balance on your credit card, perform plastic surgery. Cut it up. Get rid of it. Get rid of it. Cut it up. I can't stress that enough. And I can't stress enough, you've got to save money. You've got to save money. This keeps minor emergencies from becoming a major crisis. And remember, your purpose in life is to glorify God. How we use our money as an indicator of our spiritual life. I certainly hope this has been helpful to you, and I look forward to you achieving success in your life as you manage your money for God's glory.